Hello and welcome to the video. This is a video about my thoughts on the upcoming game called Shadespire that's made by Games Workshop and will be on pre-order on October 14th. It's mostly a critical kind of response, I guess, to videos and commentary that I've seen that have really been promoting Shadespire as a game as to act as a gateway to get more people into tabletop wargaming. And again, as someone that hasn't played the game or has access to the game, some of these other people have probably a better perspective, seeing as some of them actually have the product and have played the game at Adepticon and other resources. But this is just kind of my thoughts right now. And Shadespire is a brand new game by Games Workshop. It's part board game, part miniature game, part card game, and it's set in the world of Age of Sigmar. It's stylized by Games Workshop as easy to learn but difficult to master, in the same way, I guess, as Age of Sigmar. Because the play is fairly easy to learn, the cost of entry is only about, I think the box game itself is about $50 or so, but you still get some beautiful models, and you can play 2 or 3 games of Shadespire in an hour. And it's often described, as I said, as kind of a gateway for new players to enter the hobby. It's kind of obviously people that play currently AoS are going to be interested in this and buy it. But I think the ultimate concept behind why GW is pushing it as hard as it is to maybe get some people that really enjoy board games into Shadespire, and then maybe they'll make the transition into the tabletop game. I'm interested in Shadespire as well, and I'll almost certainly pick it up. The cost is cheap, the models are unique sculpts, and I like the idea of a quick, fun, strategic game. It's something that I can quickly put on the table and quickly have a game without too much fuss. Personally, I have several of Games Workshop's board games and card games in my collection, so it's also not a big step to say that I'll be buying it. I mean, even if I never play it, I'll probably still buy it. In general, I'm not a very competitive player, and I've seen some mixed reactions to how people are going to treat the game, or how they perceive the game will be treated. Games Workshop is really pushing Shadespire as being a competitive game that might be played in the same way as Friday Night Magic, something that's kind of you play it on a Thursday night or something like that. You get together and you play Shadespire. But others within the community see it as kind of a fast-paced game, as an opportunity to take a more relaxed approach to a game, as opposed to the more competitive tabletop variety. I suppose I would probably take that latter approach, and I think that's because the games are fairly short and the stakes are not that high. Obviously, I'm going to try my best to win a game, but, since the games are fairly short, you can kind of take it more in stride if you lose. But that is also maybe a good reason for it to be a competitive game, insofar as it's not a huge investment of time and energy. Unlike the tabletop game, right, Shadespire is fairly quick. And so in some ways it almost makes sense that you can put a large burst of energy into really trying to make it as strategic as you possibly can. And it's a little bit more quick, so you can get more opportunities to play. I didn't spend countless hours and large amounts of money to buy, build, and paint an army, only to have a major loss after a 2-hour game against an army that my personal army was not well suited to play, right? In the Age of Sigmar tournament or something like that, you might only play 3 games, and you might just get really bad matchups. The ability to play more games in an hour in some ways is a better competitive game in that sense. So I think in some ways it can be a better competitive model than AoS or 40k, which I think should be more focused on the immersive hobby as a whole. It's better in some ways that those games have a more depth that is far beyond just competitive play. So Shadespire is set to be featured and promoted at the LVO in Las Vegas and Adepticon in Chicago. And if I do attend a convention like Adepticon next year, which I sincerely hope I can make it, I will probably sign up for Shadespire. It's, again, I think it's a mix of competitive and relaxed play that I find appealing. Now, will it generally bring people into the hobby? First off, since the game hasn't been released, time will tell. But I do have some thoughts right now about the prospects in that sense. GW has really been trying to get into that market with several of its recent boxed games. But perhaps Shadespire could have greater appeal to new initiatives in the hobby. I'm not sure that the substance is much different than other GW games like a Gore Chosen that seem ironically to have very similar mechanics. At this point, I'm willing to speculate that it could be popular, but not massively successful. Popular in the sense that people already in the hobby love it and buy it, but that it doesn't have a wider interest or net of brand new players. If Games Workshop wanted to duplicate the success of Friday Night Magic, a card game would probably be the most obvious choice. Of course, in that sense, you're in direct competition with them. And as someone who's played Games Workshop's card games in the past, they didn't generally last too long, and I think they were largely appealing to only those that already played the tabletop games. And you could probably make the same claim about a Gore Chosen as well. Personally, I had a lot of hopes for Sabertooth Games, a card game company that Games Workshop bought, but then it quickly folded, and those specific card games were no longer supported. So they don't necessarily have a good history of branching out into other things and making them last, or branching into other areas in such a way that they have wider appeal beyond their existing market. If we are to speculate that Shadespire is a massive success, it could obviously raise some interesting questions. What happens if Shadespire exceeds Games Workshop's own expectations? What if it becomes a bigger success than the tabletop games? Well, if that happens, GW's business model will go through a sort of existential crisis of sorts. Excuse me. It could be that Shadespire is successful, but not enough to draw in large amounts of non-tabletop players. I think that is the most likely option. But if it is widely successful, how likely is it that it really translates into new tabletop initiatives? I'm not convinced that using models in conjunction of cards changes too much of the equation. I'm not certain that there is a strong potential for transference between Shadespire and tabletop games for people that have never played them before. Will those that play Shadespire but don't play tabletop games really paint the models? Firstly. Frankly, I can see a lot of unpainted models in Shadespire. Even if they do, there's a big difference between 4 to 5 models and 10 times that many. And that's being fairly conservative in the tabletop realm. So, there's a huge difference in the hobby requirement. There's a huge difference in the associated cost, right? I mean, a minimum, a tabletop army would cost many times the amount of Shadespire. So, I could see people making the investment in Shadespire, but saying, hold on, I'm not spending hundreds of dollars on models. And there's a huge difference in rules and the associated length of play. Again, if people are attracted to Shadespire because the games last 15 to 20 minutes, are they going to necessarily want to jump into a game that lasts 2 or 3 hours? It's the same universe and models, but I'm not really sure there's much in common beyond that. Warhammer Total War 2 just launched, and I've seen adverts that say, you've played the game, now buy the models. And if Shadespire becomes quite popular, Games Workshop will likely be pushing a similar business model. It's a strange model because the ratio of new hobbyists that make the leap must be quite small. But because the hobbyist is the ultimate consumer for a niche a business like Games Workshop, it's still a fairly profitable venture. Shadespire would have to become very popular for it to have a release many more, and it would have to also release many more components for it to become more profitable than the investment returned by a dedicated hobbyist. One thing is for certain, Games Workshop is pushing Shadespire far harder than previous games like Gore Chosen. So we'll see how it really works out, and those are my thoughts before the release of the game. I'm largely critical of some of the hype surrounding the game, and unlike those that were given early access, I've never played the game. So despite my criticism, I am looking forward to the game, and I generally do hope that it is successful, and I will certainly buy it and give it a try. So this video is a response video to Vince Venturella, his topic of the week. I'll post a link down to his video down below. You can watch that and see Vince's thoughts on it, and also the thoughts of other people that responded. And I've also posted a link of Shadespire, the new website that Games Workshop designed. So thanks for tuning in, and have a good one.